She said a black man had carjacked her and stolen her little white babies. But her story didn't quite make sense, and her eyes didn't quite produce any tears when she was supposedly crying over her loss. Plus, there was the pesky little detail of her rich boyfriend who didn't want kids. This is the story of Susan Smith, the South Carolina mom who says she's not the monster everyone thinks she is. Hi friends, I'm Katie, and this is Katie Does Crime. Thank you for joining me for the first time if you're new here. I'm a Midwesterner who now lives in New York City, putting my writing degree to use by researching true crime cases that interest me, and hopefully you. And hello to the usual rapscallions and reprobates. Please consider subscribing or joining me on Patreon if you'd like to hear more true crime stories. I don't remember when I first heard of the story of Susan Smith, but I feel like her name is just kind of in the true crime zeitgeist. So when news about her case popped up that was, new, I thought that maybe you, like me, might want to know what made her so infamous. They say the search for her kids went viral before viral missing persons were a thing. The case began in Union County, South Carolina, between Charlotte and Greenville. On October 25th, 1994, a woman heard someone sobbing on her front porch around 9 p.m. When she went to investigate, 22-year-old Susan Smith wailed, "Please help me, he's got my kids and he's got my car." She elaborated that while she was stopped at a traffic light nearby, an unknown black man had come in through the passenger door and directed her at gunpoint to shut up and drive. A few miles down the road, he had pushed her out of the car and said he didn't have time for her to unbuckle her kids in the back seat. He drove off with 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander, leaving her with nothing to do but run to a house for help. Smith told a sketch artist that the man was around 40 and wearing a dark shirt under a plaid jacket, jeans, and a dark knit beanie. Divers soon began searching a lake a quarter-mile away, while a helicopter equipped with heat sensors scoured the forest. The local chapter of the Adam Walsh Outreach Center, started by America's Most Wanted host John Walsh after his son was abducted and killed, offered to help print missing flyers and talk to the media. Smith begged God to return her children to her.
At this point, based on what happened last night, do you know anything better about it now than you did last night?
No. They've got people everywhere looking for them. You can hear the helicopters are there, and but they haven't seen anything, and it's crazy. And it's been since 9 o'clock last night, and I really thought that when it got daylight they would find them just in a heartbeat, but
Was there anything about the demeanor of the man that gives you concern?
No, in fact, when he made me get out of the car, I tried to get my children. I just begged him, please let me take them. And he said no, he didn't have time because they were in car seats and it was going to take time for me to get them out of the car seat. And he just told me, he said, but I won't hurt them. And he just took off. But he had a gun, and my big thing is they were screaming, hollering, crying. And I'm just scared that he just lost his patience or something, Yeah, I don't know. All I'm doing is just praying and just keeping my faith that they're going to be okay.
You've never seen this guy before?
No, sir. Never.
And he just came out of the blue?
I was stopped at a red light, and I was looking this way, looking toward the left, and it was just like, in a second, he was in my car. He just opened the car door, and I just screamed. I said, what are you doing? He said, shut up and drive. And he had a gun, and he was poking it in my side, and told me to drive. And so I drove, and I was trying to ask him one time, why, what do you want? Please just, don't hurt me or the children. He said, and he never said anything. All he ever told me was, shut up or I'll kill you. He said, don't say anything else. And my children were crying, and I was trying to tell him, that it was okay, that, don't worry. And he would, and he let me talk to them. And then we just got maybe 3 or 4 miles down the road, and he told me, he said, I want you to stop. And I said, stop right here? He said, yeah, stop right here. And it was just in the middle of the road. And I stopped, and he told me to get out. And I was in the driver's side, he was in the passenger side. And so I opened the door. I said, I'm going to get my children before I go. He said, no, you can't. He said, I don't have time for that. he just and sort of pushed me on out the door, helped me get on out the door, and he slammed the door and took off. And I ran to the closest house that I could.
I'm really sorry.
Smith and her estranged husband were questioned by law enforcement for 6 hours that first day and took a polygraph test. Obviously, the results of these tests are questionable, but they showed that David Smith knew nothing and Susan was being deceptive at times, most of all when it came to the question of knowing where her children were. The polygraph administrator said she fake cried without any tears during the test. She was tested again and again, but the results were always considered inconclusive. Still, police continued to have their suspicions, especially because Smith's story wasn't always the same. First, she took a trip to Walmart before the kidnapping because Michael asked to go. Then it was her who wanted to go. But when no one at Walmart could remember seeing them, she said that never mind, she was just actually out driving around. The thing that really tipped them off was that she said she stopped for the red light at the Monarch Mills intersection and was the only car there. But the thing about that particular intersection is that the street she was on is always a green light unless a car waiting on the other street causes it to turn red. If she was the only car at the intersection, she would have automatically had a green light. It didn't help that Smith slipped up once and referred to her kids in the past tense. She said they were her life. Still, Susan's estranged husband thought the focus should be on finding his kids, not questioning her, even though she perfectly fit the FBI's profile of a homicidal mother.
I do understand why they're having to do what they're doing. I'm all they have. Right now, they have not been able to rule anyone out. I don't think I'm any more of a suspect than anyone in this case right now.
It's very painful to know that anyone would think that either of us had anything to do with the seduction of our children. But me and my wife know the truth.
The search for the car continued for 9 days, and all the while, authorities worked the homicidal mother angle. They played good cop with Smith to earn her trust while also continuing to call her in for repeated interrogations. They made sure the media was putting pressure on her for statements and interviews. Basically, it sounds to me like they were trying to exhaust her. In her last police questioning, she changed the intersection where the carjacking happened from the one with the automatic green light to a different intersection. Good on her for trying, but the sheriff said police had been doing an undercover drug investigation at that new intersection the night of the kidnapping, so they knew this was also a lie. She wasn't there. He was actually lying about this himself, but it worked. The sheriff told her, "Susan, it is time," and she finally confessed to him, saying she was so ashamed. Her story was that her past had been weighing on her heavily. There was an abortion that haunted her, the difficulties in her marriage that had led to the separation, and a relationship with a man who had just dumped her because of her kids. So she went to John D. Long Lake to take her own life. And because she didn't want to leave her boys motherless, she decided to kill them too. So she let the car roll toward the lake, down the boat ramp in neutral, before she thought twice and pulled the parking brake. She tried again, but pulled the parking brake again, and a third time. Finally, she got out of the car, released the brake, and let only her children slide into the water. She said she immediately wished she could take it back, that she loved them. It took divers 2 tries, but they found her Mazda protege 18 feet deep and upside down. Michael and Alexander were still inside, hanging in their car seats. One of their hands was still pressed against the window. They were buried in a single white and gold casket. Smith was charged with 2 counts of murder and held without bond. Her brother said, "We apologize to all of the Black citizens of Union and everywhere, and hope you won't believe any of the rumors that this was ever a racial issue." Smith's parents mortgaged their house to pay for one attorney who would go on to defend one of the Boston Marathon bombers, and the neo-Nazi kid who shot up the church in South Carolina, and one attorney who defended the Unabomber. They were both known for helping clients avoid the death penalty. In February 1995, Smith underwent psychiatric evaluations from both sides. The defense's hired expert said she had a dependent personality disorder that made her terrified of being alone and in constant need of affection. The prosecution's expert said she had severe depression that caused hopelessness and worthlessness and would take her life as soon as she was given the chance. He said she felt she deserved the punishment of dying, but he also said she was fit for trial. Before that trial could take place, David Smith divorced Susan. They each got half of the boys' toys, but David got the car, which he had destroyed. With her court date looming, Smith's attorney suggested a plea deal of 30 years to life that the prosecution rejected. Still, her team thought they had a chance if they could convince her small town to feel sympathy for her. They wanted to work the mental illness angle and say that when she killed her children, she was just suffering, not inherently wicked. Her minister said she had found God in jail and been baptized. But at trial, the prosecutor called Smith a liar and a mother so selfish she'd killed her children for some guy she was dating while being separated from her husband. He said she used her parking brake like a gun and eliminated her toddlers. Her defense said she was just a damaged, childlike victim suffering from a life of depression and sadness. The man she'd been dating was the son of the owner of the textile mill where Smith worked as a secretary. This boyfriend testified that Smith was sweet and loving, but that he didn't want to raise her children. The letter he wrote to her to break things off was found in the sunken car. It said things like, "You will, without a doubt, make some lucky man a great wife, but unfortunately, it won't be me. And there are some things about you that aren't suited for me, and yes, I'm speaking about your children." One reporter said Smith was invited to parties at his house to watch Melrose Place and started picturing herself living there with the big hot tub, being romanced by the boss's son and not having to be married to an assistant store manager anymore. You have to wonder if this guy brought up her kids in the breakup letter as an excuse to end things, but Smith definitely took it as truth. Coworkers testified that Smith wondered aloud how different things would be if she didn't get married and didn't have kids so young. Different members of law enforcement testified that she fake cried about her missing boys and seemed to care most about looking good for her appearances on TV. I wonder if she was upset that her lawyer filed a motion asking that the trial not be televised. Defense witnesses said Smith had a long history of depression in her family, and hers wasn't helped by her stepfather assaulting her at a young age. One news source said their relationship later turned consensual, but I'm not sure you can characterize it that way when it sounds like she was groomed. Although a woman who wrote a book about Smith said she pursued her stepdad as a way to punish her mom. So I don't know if it was genuine or a way to help her case, but her stepdad wrote her an apology letter for what he did to her. He sent it to her on Father's Day of 1995, a month before she went to trial. Members of her family had attempted and sometimes followed through with ending their own lives, including Smith's dad. A psychiatrist said she was severely depressed and had ideations months before the drowning, that she had tried to end her life as a teenager, that she used relationships with men to ease her pain, not just the son of her boss, but with multiple men, 4 different ones in the 6 weeks leading up to the murders, which included the guy who said he didn't want to date her because of the kids, and also that guy's father, who was her boss. The theory was that she didn't care about pleasure for herself, but needed to please others for approval. But having these many relationships would then make her feel guilty, which made her even more depressed. The psychiatrist said that survival instincts kicked in for Smith when she sent Michael and Alexander rolling into the lake. Self-preservation kept her from being in the car with them. So the jury had to decide if they thought Smith was battling a life of despair based on the hand she'd been dealt, or if they thought she was a selfish mom who didn't want to deal with the decisions she'd made. The judge told them they could decide it was involuntary manslaughter instead of murder, but they basically said, "No thanks, we're good." It took them only 2.5 hours to declare her guilty of 2 murder counts. They recommended life in prison rather than death, and the judge agreed. Some say the jury thought the life part was a given, but instead, Susan Smith was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison, meaning parole was on the table. Her ex-husband David said he didn't think justice had been served because she was allowed to live at all. David has gone on to get married again and start a new family. Smith entered prison in July 1995 and, pretty much immediately began getting in trouble with drugs and for sleeping with the guards. She says it wasn't consensual. Others say she exploited them to get perks. One of the guards went to prison and the other one was put on probation. One of these men was interviewed on the Dr. Oz show years later and said that Smith was just as manipulative as ever, and he believed she could kill again. She tried to claim battered women syndrome in 2010, saying her counsel was ineffective and she needed a new trial. But a battered woman would usually kill her husband, not her kids, so the judge threw out her appeal. In July 2024, with her first parole hearing looming, it was revealed that Smith had been lining up sugar daddies for her release, convinced she would soon be out. She was doling out phone sex to at least a dozen suitors, one of which said he had over $200,000 waiting for her. She told one of them she would be happy to be a mom again. Sure, Susan. I feel very, very sorry for whoever in the Department of Corrections had to listen to the recordings of Smith giggling and heavy breathing at these men. In August 2024, the South Carolina Department of Corrections found that Smith had been communicating with a filmmaker. She gave that person contact info for her friends and family, ostensibly so they could make a documentary. And the filmmaker even deposited money into her prison canteen account. Inmates aren't allowed to participate in telephone or in-person interviews, and they're also not allowed to communicate with victims or witnesses. I guess it was considered communication with her ex-husband because she gave his info to the filmmaker. Her phone and canteen privileges were taken away for 90 days. In November 2024, the now 53-year-old Smith was up for parole despite that communication violation. She had been sentenced to 30 years to life, and those 30 years were up. More than 130 letters were sent to the South Carolina Parole Department about her bid to be released, many of them described as nasty. Smith appeared in front of the 7-member panel via video feed and cried, said she was sorry, and asked that they show her mercy as God has. They said nah, but she'll be up again for parole in 2 years and every 2 years after that, though her ex-husband says he'll be there to make sure his sons aren't forgotten. I don't know enough to know if Susan Smith is a danger to society. Many say that the things she's done in prison don't make her look like a woman who feels remorse. And I will say that I would have a hard time being sympathetic to her if I was on a jury or a parole panel. This is a woman who allowed her children to die horrifically. That car is believed to have taken 6 minutes to submerge, meaning those kids were sitting there for 6 minutes watching the water fill up around them, not knowing what was happening or why their mom wasn't there. I don't like thinking about whether they sat silently or cried for their parents. And the fact that they were hanging upside down in their car seats when they were found is just too much for me. Apparently, the judge in Smith's trial didn't even let the jury see photos of the decomposing boys because they would have swayed the jury so much. I have sympathy for Susan when it comes to her childhood, the abuse she endured from her stepfather, and how it clearly affected her if she later, quote-unquote, chose to sleep with him as an adult. I also have no problem believing that she had a personality disorder that made her feel worthless if she wasn't pleasing a man. But those are reasons to get help, not kill your kids. As always, please let me know what you think about this case in the comments. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm just a true crime fan like you are, and I really appreciate you taking a chance on me. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you liked spending this time together. I would be so appreciative. Until next time, I'm Katie, and this has been Katie Does Crime.